Welcome to the Treasury Update podcast, presented by Strategic Treasurer, your source for interesting Treasury news, analysis, and insights in your car, at the gym, or wherever you decide to tune in.
Welcome to the Treasury Update podcast. This is Craig Jeffery, and I'm your host today for this episode on the Treasury Update podcast. The title is Business to Business, or B2B, Transaction Modernization, discussing real-time payments. And I am joined with Jayna Bundy, who's the General Manager, Global Treasury and Financial Services. Jayna, welcome to the Treasury Update podcast.
Thanks, Craig. It's nice to be here. Thanks for having me.
We're in the fall, and there's been conferences where people have been together in person, and that's been a good change, I think, for the industry. I know we've had a little bit of a conversation about that. But, before we get started on B2B transaction modernization, if you could just give a quick intro. What do you do at Microsoft? And just a little bit about your career and what you do at Microsoft to start us off.
So I've been at Microsoft for about 18 years, and I currently oversee financial programs and analytics team. And what that team includes, we have global credit and collections team. We have a programs team where we do customer and supplier financing, so supply chain finance, trade finance. And we also have financial reporting and venture integrations team under the group. Microsoft
is well known for not only their products, software solutions, Azure, even laptops and headphones now that are used. I think most of the audience should be aware that Microsoft is quite a leader in payments modernization, working with Swift, just a number of areas, a leading treasury group. And I want to talk about payments and B2B modernization, B2B payment modernization. When you think about that B2B payment modernization, what do you see as being included in that broader category?
From a B2B payments modernization environment, one of the things is I think it's so manual between the buyer and seller. There's so many manual touch points, but we consider it the end-to-end process. So modernization to us means digitization and acceleration of the end-to-end process, including invoicing, a faster payment, and importantly, the remittance data that's needed to apply those payments. So if you think about it from invoicing to the reconciliation standpoint, we really believe that the process starts upstream. And so as we talk about faster payments, a lot of times we just talk about that middle piece and how do we accelerate payments. But I think what we forget about is the acceleration of collection and a payment is dependent on the speed and accuracy of an invoice. So that's been a lot of our focus as part of the modernization, is looking at it holistically across all aspects. And I think there's a real need and a tremendous value in modernizing B2B payments, just because of the highly manual, labor-intensive processes that go with it, which are prone to errors and they're super costly. And one thing I'll mention is, today as part of the process, I'm surprised at how many checks still exist in the ecosystem, which is super cumbersome and creates additional risk. So we're looking at it holistically from various standpoints. To add the evolution as we think about this, to help facilitate this transition from kind of a fragmented manual process between buyers and sellers to a really automated one that includes full straight-through processing throughout the process. And we think that while businesses gain efficiencies through this modernization, there's a lot of benefits to gain. So lower costs, better cash management, reduction in errors, and increased insights in the payments activity and reporting. So we think those are really important.
You've mentioned transaction modernization and this comprehensive end-to-end look. Do faster payments matter? Is that a minor component? Is that an important component? Is that the primary component?
I think faster payments matter. Certainly. It's something we talk about a lot at Microsoft, whether it's a payout or a pay-in, so a request for payment. And it's solutions that we definitely want to take advantage of, but we think it does rely on kind of the upstream integration and downstream integration as well. If we only solve for the faster payment, and when I always think of it as a middle layer, it's not going to achieve the full benefits of it. So when I think about if it takes me 30 days to get an invoice to the customer because I have to manually send it, or I send it and it doesn't get to the right place, it doesn't really help me with faster payment necessarily. So we're looking at the whole ecosystem together, but we really do believe in the faster payments and all the initiatives that are going around that. I think we just need to look at it holistically and make sure it's efficient end to end.
You had mentioned remittance detail as part of that efficiency in the process. And I think that gets to the other question about cost and efficiency. Those things tend to be related. What are some of the goals here, and how would you look at the cost, either cost in terms of financial cost or time delay? How do you look at that?
Maybe I'll just take just a really quick step back and talk about like how we've looked at this process, because we started a project about a year ago to really look at it. It actually started with the customer experience. How do we make the customer experience at Microsoft better? And then as we began going down this road, we kind of uncovered some opportunities, and one of them was invoicing. We realized that for us, we have multiple billing engines, and it can be a somewhat fragmented process. And it could vary in terms of how we deliver invoices to our customers. So it could be like, EDI, we could do emails, print and post. And then we were seeing a lot of requirements where we have to use multiple service providers to provide invoicing globally. What we found is these disparate and fragmented processes have higher cycle times. And delivery of the invoices to our customers were causing delays in the overall order to cash process. And we know invoicing impacts the time to collect. And so again, what we're also finding is on our collections team would talk to a customer and find that the invoice hadn't even gotten there when maybe we were already at 30 days overdue. Each day collections are delayed, it impacts our cash flow from collections and our working capital. That's very impactful when we delay that. So we really realized that there needs to be a focus on accelerating that process and having full transparency. We knew that it had to be digitized to achieve the maximum benefit. And one thing that probably isn't talked about, we talk about costs a lot and process and efficiencies, but ultimately the accounts receivables team struggling a bit with the manual invoicing processing has a real negative impact on our customers. And our customers are our greatest asset. And so we really realized we need to solve for the customer experience as well.
Yeah, I like that, solving for the customer experience, and that interrelationship. I know some of the challenges that we talked about when we were just doing a preparatory call for this. We talked about the procure-to-pay systems, where there's a lot of initiatives in companies to improve their payables process, right? So they're using procure to pay. So they're looking at the process to some extent, and to a large extent, really, from the start of how do I buy something to how do I pay. And that doesn't always translate into the other receiving side. And, we experience in that with the different procure to pay systems. You sign up on them, or that's how you're getting paid. And it can sometimes be an efficient process, and it can also sometimes be a very unscalable, inefficient process. Maybe you could talk about what you're seeing there. How are you looking at solving those types of issues if we're looking end to end?
It's a really good point. What we're seeing is part of our customers' own digital transformation journey. We're seeing an increase in them choosing their own procure-to-pay systems. Some of them are third-party and some of them are in-house built. The ask from them is they'd really like invoices delivered to them electronically and seamlessly in the system of their choice. Our goal is to say yes to doing that in terms of how we think about the customer experience. The result is we have thousands of customers now choosing to use procure-to-pay portals. What we're seeing is it takes a lot of manual upload. So essentially pulling an invoice from a billing engine and then making sure you get it into the customer's procure to pay portals. And sometimes that requires customization. Each portal is different. Each customer may have different requirements within a portal. So portal A, customer, A and B might look differently. We know this is growing. We know there's additional demands. Today, we support about 100 various portals for our customers. And we continue to see growth in these requests. So we have, our revenue running through the portals is growing, as well as the transactions running through them. One of the issues with it is that it's an extremely manual process, subject to error because there's so much manual intervention. And it delays the invoice actually getting to the customer, which isn't our goal as we think about this. What we've seen also is when you have manual input, we're seeing high failure rates for the first pass yield. So we get it in and there's something happening with the invoice, so it doesn't get accepted. we have to spend a lot of time on triage. Why didn't it go? Why wasn't it accepted? And so in order to scale, I think it's really important that we move to standard connections to these various systems. It's really critical for our ability to scale and get the invoices there quickly. We've always felt really strongly about, standards, and we've been big in terms of a big advocate. As you mentioned earlier, we were an early Swift adopter. And so we really believe in being able to connect. We've talked kind of agnostically to various banks we work with, for example. And so when I look back at our cash management experience, we backed away from various banking portals connecting through Swift in a standardized way. So I see invoicing having a lot of capabilities to do something very similar to that. So how do we connect with our customers and their portals with common messaging? And how can we do it through an interoperable ecosystem? We want them to use the procure to pay systems that, are meaningful for their business. It just makes it hard unless we can standardize how we communicate and connect with them. So we're really thinking about the need of, this open network with interoperability for us to connect to multiple customers on multiple platforms seamlessly. And so they can use any system they choose and we can still get the invoices to them seamlessly. I'll just mention really quickly, when we started this project, we started thinking about our North Star, and it was like, what do we want this to look like? And it was both for statutory invoicing and non-statutory invoicing. And statutory invoicing, for the most part, has more digitization. What we were finding is more of the non-statutory, that there's no requirement for electronic delivery of invoice, was less standardized. And so we started this North Star to think about what do we want to achieve. And it was a scalable e-invoicing strategy across the company, a way that we can work to drive industry standards around automation and then deliver efficiency at scale. That was critical for us. Whatever solution we wanted to build, it had to enable faster payments. So that was a critical component for us. And then again, I mentioned this earlier, improve our customer satisfaction and our customer experience. And so that's really been the focus of some of the initiatives that we've been working on for the past year or so.
So you talked a little bit about standards, portals, supporting your customers. I can't remember what the number of portals you said you used. Was it over 100?
Yeah, it's over 100 right now.
Well, I'm not going to complain about the number of portals we use. I was, we're familiar with like Ariba, Coupa, Tungsten, et cetera. There's a whole, Bottom Line has one. I mean, there's a whole array of these platforms. Just as a background, I mean, you said this was growing. How is that growing percentage-wise compared to, let's say, regular revenue growth? Is it, how is it taking?
It's actually about the same right now. We're seeing about, 10 to 15%. I think it's increasing. We're getting more and more requests for procure to pay systems. And again, we don't want to say no. We want to be able to say yes to the customer and however they would like to get invoices. But from a scalability perspective, it makes it really hard until we can digitize the whole invoicing process, because otherwise someone has to manually go into portals. They kind of look similar to a banking portal where we've had to have tokens and you have to log in and have your password. And it takes time. And so what we found is that the end-to-end process and the volumes of invoices that can take the team, 3 to 5 days to get into a system. And we know that each day it takes us to get into the procure to pay portals is going to cost us, because usually the clock starts ticking with customers when they receive the invoice. That's their preference. And so we're trying to accelerate that process so we can get it to them instantly.
On another podcast, or maybe a discussion that's not part of a podcast, we should probably talk about the history of portals. I remember some of the government portals that were on the earlier side, and people would have to put 4 people to to handle, several $1 million worth of invoices. It was like, this is unsustainable. Things have certainly gotten better, but like you said, there's a lot of room for that. Jayna, as we continue the discussion, I think that covers a good part of the portals and your view of this comprehensive or holistic look. Maybe we could talk on the payment side, right? The payment side is the end part, the other part of the exchange of value. You need to provide services or software, and how does that work? And I wanted to talk about real-time payments. Maybe you could just give us a quick overview of real-time payments, and where do you see, I guess we could talk about issues and opportunities with this faster payment method, right? We want to, well, maybe I'll just leave it there. What are how would you describe real-time payments and the opportunities?
We do receive real-time payments today. So we do see actually an uptick in customers. I wouldn't say it was huge yet, right? I think it's still, I think we thought there'd be kind of more adoption than it is. And it could be partly because of some of our lines of business and the threshold amounts that can go through the real-time payments rails today. But we are seeing sending or incoming payments coming through real-time payments. One of the things we've talked a lot about is request for payment, because on the collection side, we want to make it easier for the customer to pay us. And so we're always thinking about what solutions we can help, particularly on the B2B side, for customers to pay us quickly. And as we think about elimination of checks, because it's something that we're retiring checks at Microsoft, but it's a long process. And customers are still very used to paying in checks. And so we're saying, what alternative payment types can we offer as we retire and eliminate checks? And so request for payment has always been a very interesting topic for the Treasury team, specifically on the receivable side, to say, hey, is there a way we can get this request for payment out? One of the things I think we're spending more time looking at, however, is that request for payment doesn't always replace an invoice. And so we got to also figure out, like, how do we still accelerate the invoice delivery contractually or legally or whatever the customer requires, and then add the request for payment on top of it. So the team's spending a lot of time there. It's definitely a key topic for us. One of the things, and I'm actually pleased to hear from some of the providers we've been talking about, whether it's, some of our banking partners or the clearinghouse or FedNow, is the remittance information that goes with it. We were an early adopter of ISO, and the reason we implemented ISO 20022 was for the enriched data that was going to come with the payments. We haven't really seen that as much as we had hoped. And we still are trying to kind of go deeper on, is it that it's not being sent? Is it not being received? Or kind of legacy systems kind of cutting the data off? Because we find that we can still get the data in a banking portal, but we don't always get it as we need through kind of our camped, bank statements that are coming through Swift. So that's been a big focus too, to say, hey, like faster payments, we want to make sure that if we do this, it also has the data to accelerate the reconciliation and the posting of cash. That's also a challenge for us, and an area of focus at Microsoft is the automation piece of being able to apply cash. Well, we apply cash at a 99% rate each month. A big amount of that is manual. So when we think about automation, we're looking to accelerate. So we could say, hey, from an automation perspective, it probably hits 60. The team goes in and maybe adds some machine learning on top of it. But there's still a lot of manual touch points, and like looking at a transaction and trying to get the remittance information that's needed to offset the payment to the right customer account or to the right invoice. That's kind of how we're looking at it, to make sure that we don't just solve for a faster payment. Again, we're solving for the whole ecosystem.
Yeah, a faster payment without the detail necessary, or less detail, makes a harder process. And
yeah, absolutely. And hopefully, what we'd like to see is, we know that there are other systems that you can achieve and get remittance information, but it kind of takes you out of your system, right? You say, okay, well, I got my payment in, it's sitting kind of in a holding queue so I can apply it. And they're saying, oh, you can get the information here, or we can send you a separate file. And it gets tough because it takes you out of the process and adds another step. Ideally, it would come with the payment and it would be able to auto post right into our ERP systems.
Tell me if this is right. I think the implications of what you're saying, the background here, is that you moved to ISO 20022, a richer, extensible markup language format where the sender or the banks could provide quite a bit more information with the payments, with the message would be much more complete, but not everybody's sending it. Not every bank is forwarding it, like you said, through SWIFT. So we're losing information, and that's really critical. I don't know if it's more critical, but it's at least as critical. The information is at least as critical as the payment. And in fact, the actual payment should decline in our emphasis compared to the information. Information will be more important than the transaction for the efficient business process, is kind of what I'm hearing you.
Yep. Yeah. I actually believe that. I think, again, it's that other piece. You can get the faster payment to me, but if I can't apply it, it's going to sit there until I get the information I need to apply it. And that takes a lot of manual steps, whether it's going to another system to get the information or actually calling the customer.
Yeah, and calling the customer is a defect or an interruption on your side and an interruption on the consumer side. I usually refer to those as defects, right? It's like everyone drops something to answer a call with a human, and two people on both sides. That's probably the least efficient way of doing things. So,
yeah, absolutely. And I just, with so much good data and in so many ways to send and receive it, I feel like there's an opportunity to get better at.
I'm going to ask some other future-oriented questions on that too. Certainly things we didn't talk about in our general prep session. So don't be surprised if I'm not trying to stump you, but just I want to think about that together from a real-time payments perspective, from a broader payments perspective. You're on the Business Payments Coalition, or someone on your team is on there. What's being done there? What's being worked on?
Yeah. And this was great. Like, we found out is this whole project we were doing at Microsoft, we found out about the Business Payments Coalition. We started at the e-invoicing piece of it because we were like, oh, they have this initiative that they're working on. But for a little bit of background, so the Business Payments Coalition is a volunteer group of organizations and individuals. So it includes corporations, service providers, there's banking partners in it. And the focus is really working together to promote greater adoption of electronic business to business payments. And so they have various work streams. So they have an ISO work stream, they have a remittance work stream, I believe a faster payments work stream, and then a e-invoicing work stream. And you can join all of them. You can focus on one of them, whatever is most important. One of the areas that we focused on was the e-invoicing work that they were doing. And one of those main efforts was implementing a framework for invoice exchange in the U.S. It's a U.S. focused. It's sponsored by the Federal Reserve of Minneapolis. And so they kind of help keep us on track with some of these initiatives we're thinking about. It's not mandated. It's just an exchange framework that buyers and sellers and service providers can connect to. I think of it, a lot similar to kind of how SWIFT would work with the banks connect. We don't connect directly, but we're able to send, our payments and receive statements through the exchange network of SWIFT. This is very similar. And so it uses a set of standards. It's very, XML based. It's common. It's based on some global standards that have been implemented, across other countries, particularly Europe and the Nordics have been using PEPL, which is very similar. So it's standards, policies, guidelines, and really the goal is to enable businesses to connect once and exchange invoices and data with anyone in the network. So independent of the platform or system they're using. And so the way that it works at a high level is that, think of four parties, like Microsoft being a supplier. And I want to send my invoices however I want to send my invoices. And then, Microsoft has a buyer who wants to receive their invoices in the way they want to receive it. Each of us would have a service provider that would connect to the network. It doesn't matter who we choose to use. We can use multiple service providers, but those are the connection points. And the great thing about it is a standard schema, if you will, of how an invoice is exchanged. It reminds me of when I was working on implementing, ISO years ago on the banking side for payments and for statements. Very, very similar. And it's like, how do fields and invoices map to a standard schema? So the team has spent a ton of time, even before we joined, there had been a large group of participants who have subject matter expertise in these areas. And they've spent time working with industry standards across the world. There were technical committees that came in and really worked on the schema. But the big part of this pilot we were working on was to begin to test the schema. And so would this work? And so we rolled it out in phases, test phases. So we could test kind of a simple invoice exchange, and then we get more complicated as we go. And so we're currently in phase 3, or we're calling it wave 3, a market pilot. We have I believe there are about 90 participants in the pilot. And we test. And so we've been testing with a service provider we use. We send it to our end customer service provider, and it's actual end customer, Microsoft. And then we kind of say, here's a happy path. Did it work? Did it load into your ERP system? And the good news is we're actually exchanging invoices in a test environment end to end seamlessly. So the various waves of the pilot give us a chance to really test out the schema, throw a few things at it. Like, is this really going to work? And so we continue to test. And I think the goal of the market pilot would be testing through the end of December at a minimum. We'll probably do some more parallel testing. The exchange framework would look to go into production, and probably Q2 2023 would be the goal.
So glad you guys continue to participate in these industry initiatives that help, all organizations. As you think about the way forward and any other thoughts that you might have on it, I wanted to ask, there's this, we've got to get these newer payment formats able to contain more data so the process is cleaner. There's more visibility. It's easier to repair. There's a lot of these new payment rails coming on. There's a massive number across the globe that's happening. Is this iteration, like real-time payments for the Fed, the request for payments, the ability to attach documents, is that the end game for the next 10 years? Or are we going to have smart contracts where this information's embedded? Are we going to have payments that are smarter where we're embedding invoices in the request that can be taken out and digitally passed? Is that not going to be ISO? Is that going to be ISO plus other items that are embedded? Is that within 10 years, or is this something we need to be thinking about over 20 years?
Oh, that's a good question. I don't know if I have my crystal ball. I will tell you that we think a lot about smart contracts. We talk a lot about, blockchain solutions and digital currencies, and, where is that? So it's part of when we think of like payment strategy holistically at Microsoft, those are all the conversations we're having about the future. I couldn't really say the timing of it, because I think we still do a lot of like proof of concepts to test things out. I think one of the things with this that I see, and it also applies to even the e-invoicing exchange framework that we've been working on with the BPC, is market adoption, right? It's when we think about building some of these solutions, whether it's smart contracts or embedding payments or digital, do we have counterparties that can do the same with us, right? So I think that's a big important piece of it, is market adoption and kind of where is everyone else in this process. But I definitely, we are prepared for it coming. We actively participate in conversations. And as I mentioned, think about the future and how we can start building for it now. But they usually come in the form of proof of concepts, maybe leaning into pilots. I will mention, this is a little bit off this topic, but when I went to Sibos this year, it was one of the things we talked about related to post-trade FX settlement, right? And what does the future look like? And I do see it kind of moving towards more of a blockchain smart contract settlement in the future, even if it isn't digital currencies quite yet, right? Because we still know that there's a lot of kind of regulation and risk around that we're, we as companies are all thinking through.
Perhaps the settlement, whether it's digital currency like a CDBC or something else, is less important in the scheme of trade over time. Here's another question. Some of your comments were spurring me to think this way. You're familiar with SWIFT, and they're moving more towards this payments platform as opposed to a messaging platform. A message is one party delivers, it gets handed off. Maybe it loses data by the time it gets to the end. And we're talking about, why can't we include all of that data? The CAMP-T message, the other XML formats can accept that. That should pass through. And that's one area of growth for solving your core question at the beginning. That's one, send the data and make sure it passes through. And then there's the the platform type solutions like this, the Swift platform, where it's like everyone can access it, but it's like the data sits there and you can access it. You can repair a problem with a payment, which is one side. Why wouldn't this type of platform, whether you use blockchain or whether you use other type of technology for this platform, where what are you paying for? Here's the invoice. The invoice sits there. Payment instructions or change instructions are sitting there where everybody can access it. Are those converging? Or are they?
Yeah, I think it's emerging. I actually think when you think about some of the data, blockchain solves a lot of it because of the transparency between the parties, how we solve some of those challenges we have when we don't have the data on certain things. It could be various. It might be an invoice. It could be a payment. It could be other things. It could be supply chain. Those are the scenarios where we really see the value in the transparency and data that goes with it. You're not having to like go through separate processes, right? It's on the blockchain. You have full transparency and visibility. And I think now we did an early POC around trade finance on blockchain. And it was really new at the time. And so now we see so much more visual layers on top of it where you see the data. And so I'm excited of where that is heading from a user experience. So we know what's happening in the blockchain behind the scenes, but sometimes you get intimidated if I'm not like a technology person. Do I know how to interpret this? A lot of visual layers over it that are built right into your systems that you use every day will, I think, be critical. But I think that solves a lot of the problems about the data if we think about a blockchain solution in the future.
You've reached the end of another episode of the Treasury Update podcast. Be sure to follow Strategic Treasurer on LinkedIn. Just search for Strategic Treasurer. This podcast is provided for informational purposes only, and statements made by Strategic Treasurer LLC on this podcast are not intended as legal, business, consulting, or tax advice. For more information, visit and bookmark strategictreasurer.com.